I'm Dr. Cameron Miley with the American Lamb Board, and today I'm going to be talking about climate smart lamb and opportunities for growth in the U.S. sheep industry. All right. Well, I thank you for the opportunity to present to you guys today virtually, and hopefully either have seen you or will be seeing you in Arizona. Uh, so again, climate smart lamb and opportunities for growth in the sheep industry, and as a representative of the American Lamb Board. Uh, there I work as the director of sustainability. And if you're not familiar with what the Land Board is or what they do, it is the trade organization that is checkoff funded and tasked with marketing American lamb to the American consumer. And so that is one avenue. And if you're familiar with the organization, you've probably seen the recipes that have been produced and advertised on that website and through various social media channels. The second arm of the organization is the industry facing or producer facing side of the organization. And so the web page that I've pulled up here is a representation of that arm of the organization. I like to ask everybody in the room when I'm there in person, how many of you know what the American Land Board is, and have you seen this webpage before? And I've kind of coined this as one of the industry's best kept secrets. There's a lot of producer resources on here, best practices, just tools for sheep producers to utilize and tap into to improve the production and efficiencies of their operation. Uh, on top of that, just information and current events, what's going on, what events are happening, what in-person educational events are coming up. And so I would challenge you to go out and take a look at this website, take a look through those resources. That's what your checkoff dollars are going to fund. And if there's resources under this shop category up in the top right hand corner that you're interested in, certainly submit to receive those and be happy to send something out to you. So on top of the producer facing aspects of the American Lamb Board, again, the recipe items, if you're doing some direct marketing and trying to educate your buyers, your consumers of your product, how do you cook lamb? Sometimes it can be intimidating. Resources there for you to utilize in those direct market sales. The other item here in the top right, the American Sheep Industry Sustainability Report, put together by ALB and ASI, has also helped with that. One of my favorite resources at American Lamb Board, and something that I think does a very nice job if you are a sheep producer, or maybe you want to become a sheep producer. Something you read through and just allows a level of pride in what you're doing to contribute to a sustainable venture in protein production. So as we get into the heart of this, I think it's important to look at where we're at as a sheep industry and why do we need to look for these opportunities of growth. Uh, Specifically on the meat side of things and the lamb consumption side of things, consumption of lamb is increasing, and that's exciting. A lot of that has to do with a younger generation that has a food culture mentality, and that's a lot of times on that traditional market side of things. We also have a significant impact from our non-traditional or ethnic consumption side of cultural eating. So ultimately, lamb consumed in the US, 60 to 70% of that lamb is imported from New Zealand or Australia. And, when I'm talking to a room full of people that maybe aren't sheep producers, put your commodity in that, put your product in that category. And pretty quickly we say, oh, 60 to 70% is unacceptable. That's a greater portion than what we're able to produce and put in front of our American consumer. This import impacts both traditional and non-traditional markets. A lot of times we think that this is only impacting a restaurant trade or retail trade, and reality is that it touches all facets of of the industry and what we're producing here in the US. So again, it's just something that as sheep producers we've come to accept, and um, kind of the role that I play at American Land Board, or am trying to play in getting producer education out, is how do we produce more lamb? How do we get more lamb on the shelf, more lamb on people's tables, to recapture some of this and continue to grow the interest in consuming that lamb protein? So some of the reason why, and the challenges around why we have the imports, and why that level is so significant. We've got a green line here denoting price of racks in the U.S., and that's U.S. production, and then New Zealand, Australian product there below it. And we see that there's a significant difference in pricing. A lot of that has to do with the strength of our American dollar and that exchange rate. And so that's something that's always changing. That's the first challenge we're up against. Ultimately, that product is landing here after a very significant footprint to ship it overseas to America. It's getting here cheaper than what we're able to produce it. And so as we look at production efficiencies and evaluating kind of our business model and scale at which we manage these operations, this is something that's always in the back of our minds. When we look at the research and the data that's been collected for competitiveness of American lamb at the meat counter, the American consumer is willing to pay more for that American product. Our challenge is making sure that it's there. And so that's where opportunities for growth really comes into play, and making sure we can provide that product when that consumer wants to purchase. When we look at sheep and lamb numbers as of the first of this past year, and this is survey data that's from previous years, right around 5 million sheep in the U.S., sheep and lambs. I don't have the numbers in front of me to know what it was 100 years ago, but we're on a pretty steady decline in sheep production. It's something, again, as a sheep producer, you've just heard it at an extension meeting or a national meeting, and it's just a fact of life. I think what's positive, and the one thing I do want to note, if we look at where the majority of sheep are being raised, and that would be denoted in these dark blue states. We've got Texas, California, for an example. A lot of it is dominated in a Western environment. Those tend to be more extensive range type operations. And what's interesting to me is when you look at growth, and this is the percent change of sheep from 23 into 24. Outside of Oklahoma and a select few states there in the Western region, we're seeing reduction of that flock inventory. However, when we move east of the Mississippi, our trend is upward. We are seeing growth in the eastern United States, some minimal and then some significant. And it'll be interesting to see if this continues, kind of where it continues and why is it continuing to grow. And so that's just something from a sheep industry snapshot that we have to be considerate of. Industry challenges. If we're being honest, it's not the easiest thing to do. Agriculture is not an easy job. It is not an easy career choice. And when we think about challenges specific to the sheep industry, some are general to agriculture, one being the aging of an ag demographic. So what's the average age of the American farmer? It's not 25. I can tell you that. It's significant. We get up in those ages, and then ultimately farm succession. So what happens when there isn't a generation to follow up that individual that has spent their life working so hard to create an ag-centered business? That's a huge threat. And when we look at, there was some survey data collected from ASI, when we look at options or reasons why a farm or ranch would not be raising sheep in the next 5 years, family or personal life situations were one of the uh, top responses on why they would not be raising sheep in the next 5 years. On top of that, if that wasn't enough, the predation aspect. We know we have an animal that is a prey type animal. We're subject to predation in the east. Animals like coyotes in the west more severe. Wolves, bears, stuff that I don't really want to deal with. And fortunate that I don't have to, but sympathetic towards those that do. And so again, we have organizations that are working tirelessly on policy and items to assist those farmers and ranchers with these predation issues. But you can only sell a live animal, and if that live animal is being threatened by a predator, it's something that it's just not fun to deal with and a challenge. Then we have predators that are maybe unseen or we cannot see with the naked eye. Parasites. When we look at health concerns of the sheep industry across the US, parasites make it to the top of the list consistently over and over again. That was something. I don't love parasites. For me, it's somewhat of job security. That's what both my master's and PhD work was focused on, was parasite resistance and the immune system and how it functions to evade that parasite susceptibility. And so that's an issue that we've got researchers across the U.S. working tirelessly on to provide data and assist with genetic selection to sustainable approaches of parasite control. Reproductive seasonality. Something that, and the reason I put this in there is we don't necessarily see this with our other livestock species. Sheep have a natural lambing window, and some breeds are able to work around that biology and are more what we'd consider aseasonal, or don't have a set season where reproductive function is working at a high level. And so we tend to not only lamb at a certain time of year, but as a result of that, market lambs at a certain time of year, which creates a lot of issue for the industry from a supply aspect year round. Challenge of marketing, challenge of labor during those lambing seasons with a significant number of sheep. And so there's just a lot of things that go into sheep production that are not easy, and not complaining, but there's a lot of things in agriculture that are not easy. So as we get into what that title is about and what we're going to talk about today and focus on, climate smart practices. Fortunate to work with American Land Board and their Climate Smart grant that they received from USDA. Part of that, there are 4 pilot sites trying to take a snapshot of the U.S. sheep industry and collect data that shows, hey, we're doing a good job. A lot of our producers already think they're doing a good job, and I'm not going to question that. But what we'd like to do is tell that story. And to tell that story, it's going to be really nice to have data to back it up. And on top of that, another 150 producers that are going to benefit from implementing some of these climate smart practices. And so that's going to be years down the road, and certainly working through the application processes now. But when we look at climate smart practices and what USDA defines as climate smart practices, there are a couple that I like to highlight that are weaknesses and then strengths of the U.S. sheep industry today. And so when we look at nutrient management and manure management and how we approach those things, there was some survey data collected by American Land Board that identified less than half, a very low percentage of sheep producers have a nutrient management plan in place, have a manure management plan that they're working off of. That's something that maybe in the central part of the U.S. and further west, we don't talk about a lot. When I worked at Penn State Extension, and you get to a certain point in the state, and you're looking at what that watershed is doing, and so everybody is required to have a nutrient management plan. Where I reside currently, state of Ohio, algae blooms in Lake Erie. I mean, cracking down on the dairy industry, the swine industry, um, which then forces our other ruminant species to adopt these practices. It's something that, again, this is just our function of being a good steward. I think it's our responsibility and something that's very easy to adopt and look at. Those are the things that I think we really need to work on that don't take a lot of effort. And we all have animals, if we're raising sheep, we all have animals that are defecating and putting nutrients either back out on a pasture or into a barn and then being spread later. The item I want to touch on where I feel like the industry is doing a good job, but can always continue to improve, and that's prescribed grazing. How do we approach those climate smart pasture practices, implement those, and maybe pull them out a little bit further? So implement, but also improve down the road if we're already implementing those practices. So when we think about American Land Board and what our commitment is to the consumer facing side of things, we want to educate consumers that, hey, your farmers and ranchers that are producing this product, lamb, that you love to consume, are doing a good job. They are stewards of the land and working at making sure that you have a healthy, wholesome product on your plate to feed your family. When we look at prescribed grazing and what can be achieved on the lamb side of things, on the ewe side of things, just a lot of opportunity. And again, areas for improvement across the board. So prescribed grazing in targeted grazing, and we're going to kind of shift from that climate smart and stack that on top of these opportunities for growth. But targeted grazing is not a new thing to the sheep industry. Was recently at an event and was working with some ASI individuals, and that conversation was, this is novel to the industry that the folks were in. This is not novel to the sheep industry. This is something we've been practicing targeted grazing, prescribed grazing for decades. Prescribed grazing probably even for centuries. You could make a claim there. And so this is something that shepherds and the sheep industry understands and should know that we have a significant opportunity to cash in and take advantage of an animal that does this exceptionally well. It's an advantage of small ruminants, whether it's transport, ability to contain and work without injury with these animals is significant. I think there's a lot of exciting new opportunities with targeted grazing. When we think about where we can graze sheep, I mean, it's extensive. There's a lot of areas that can't do a lot of other things with that are perfectly conducive to raising sheep on. And how do we capitalize on those areas to produce a product and grow a U.S. industry? And then stackable practices. So we just got done talking about prescribed grazing and climate smart practices and sequestering carbon. We can throw that in there. And how do we stack that on top of creating a sustainable, profitable grazing model? I think it fits quite well with that prescribed grazing aspect and then that targeted approach to grazing. And so we want to maximize and optimize some of these opportunities and stack those, put those on top of each other for that future sustainability in the industry. So one of those exciting new areas that I wanted to touch on in this presentation, and American Land Board has been very active in promoting and providing producer education to carry this out at a high level, and that's agrivoltaics. If you're not familiar with what agrivoltaics is, it's something that has really been gaining some traction and very exciting. I get excited to talk about it, and defined here from the National Renewable Energy Lab. And I don't want you to walk away from this and say, oh man, the guy from American Land Board cannot stand butterflies or bees. That's not the case. I think they're great. I think we need to pay attention to it and do what we can to improve those environments. but we're talking about grazing. And so, the one thing that's in bold in there that we're going to continue to talk about is the grazing aspect of agrivoltaics. How do we pair clean energy production and producing American lamb in the same environment and create a win-win situation? We think about one of the greatest hurdles to sheep producers in the eastern United States. I think we can put another red X over that and say the United States. Regardless of where we're at, we need access to land to graze animals. That's a function of grazing. It takes up space. If we're creating a benefit in that space, access. That is one of those challenges that it was left off that initial list because it's in this slide. But one of the challenges that, if we lose access to that public acreage in those Western range environments, we don't have a sheep industry on that specific set of acreage. Something that, again, from the policy side and as producers, what happens in the next 5 years makes a difference and really can shape and reshape what our industry looks like. So wanted to provide a map here from the Solar Energy Industries Association. And in the interest of time, didn't want to get too into the solar development side of things. If you're interested in that and understanding more about that, I would challenge you to hop on this website and do some of your own research, do some digging there, and educate yourself. Take some of those flyers and figure out, what does your state look like from a solar energy growth standpoint? Where I'm at in Ohio today, growth is substantial. A lot of that is being supported by an industrial boom that's occurring in the central part of the state, with manufacturing, with data storage, companies that want to see a green energy power those plants, or at least get those credits off of that so that they're at a net zero level by a certain date, a certain time that they've committed to. So what's the need? When we think about goal of the solar panel, and if we were all in a classroom, I'd ask you that question because it's pretty easy. The answer is collect sunlight, produce energy. What is not conducive to collecting sunlight? Shade. We have a situation here with some panels that mismanaged. We have some vegetation management that has gone in and cleared out in between panels. What are they going to have to do underneath that array, directly underneath those panels? Well, somebody's going to have to go in and weed whack that. And I can tell you, I don't want that job. I don't think that sounds like a lot of fun. What I think sounds like a lot of fun is grazing sheep on this site before it gets to this point, so that we can manage those difficult to manage species. We can manage that grassland and actually create a win-win environment for solar company and grazer. We think about vegetation management. It's a vital part of the solar development planning. And so this is something that companies know they're going to face for 25, 30, 40 years, the lifetime or the lifespan of this set of arrays. And so these solar sites, that is a long-term commitment. That's a long-term opportunity for the sheep industry, for the grazer, to take advantage of some of these contracts to manage that ground and be paid to do so. It's an annual necessity. Fortunately for us, maybe unfortunately for the solar company, that grass continues to grow every year. Not only one time a year, some environments, one time a year and one mow, one grazing event may accomplish the job. A lot of environments where these are being installed multiple times a year and then every year. And so it's a long-term situation, but also annual situation. And so a lot of benefits to that grazing environment that we're already managing sheep in. So why grazing? Grazing can minimize the need for mowing, reducing labor and emissions. This idea of green on green. What's the value of green energy or clean energy? And I'm not here today to tell you whether it's right or wrong. That's for you to decide. But in those installations, in those solar arrays that do exist, why not graze sheep underneath panel? why not create a business model that thrives with targeted grazing that the industry has been doing for decades, and also tell a really cool story on how we are lowering emissions in that environment, how we're creating those ag-centric jobs in communities that sheep specific job didn't exist in before. That's something that I get really excited about. And then also, the debate and the conversation of if we're taking ground out of ag production, can we return it into or continue to keep it in ag production with a grazing animal, specifically sheep? When we think about specifically sheep, why sheep? Frankly, they fit. It's something that stature wise of that animal fits under the panel. They're not rough on panels. Cattle, there's a lot of research being done on what does it take to build a cattle friendly solar site. And right now, the data that uh, I've been presented, the cost analysis doesn't really work out in favor of creating those sites. Down the road, that's not to say that that won't be the norm as we see a change in the cost of technology and cost of installation. But today, sheep are the common sense fit in these environments. Reduce liability with maintenance individuals. There are people on these sites managing these panels, managing wires, everything that goes into the energy production side of things. Around cattle, could it be an issue? Certainly, it's different than being around sheep. And then weed suppression through grazing. We know we have an animal. It's the whole point of setting this up with a targeted grazing example, targeted grazing industry that has existed. We have a different grazing behavior in sheep that really make them a nice fit in these environments. To the note that they fit, this picture on the left, you'll see some sheep in the background under shade. We look at the animal welfare aspect of things and actually providing shade in a grazing environment that maybe they would not have had access to before. Certainly can have beneficial forage species in these environments that are conducive for growth, and certainly hitting maintenance on some mature ewes, which is what we're looking at in this picture. Short video here, we've got some legume, just mixed sort of grass, and this individual, this sheep we're looking at, is not going for those highly palatable legumes in that grazing environment, going straight for those erect weeds that would be the shade problem species in this environment if there were panels out there. Again, just a testament to the diversity of grazing behavior in our sheep and why they make a lot of sense in these environments. Ultimately, we're providing a service. This is not going out on the back 40 or out on that western range and just grazing however we want to. That I think is the greatest challenge to a lot of our producers in changing how we communicate, changing how we manage animals so that it is what so that it meets somebody else's expectations. And that's a difficult thing to do regardless of the industry you're in. Vegetation management is a long-term paid service. And I highlighted that because I challenge you not to go out and say, well, it's free grass. Yeah, I should be able to go out and graze my animals. Yes, there's grass, but the management of these sites is not, again, not your backyard, not how you have normally operated. And so there are challenges associated with grazing and agrivoltaics. Two primary methods. Mowing right now is how a lot of these companies plan to manage vegetation. Grazing, we may still need some mechanical means of managing that vegetation, but I think it's still a better situation where we can graze 3 passes and mow 1 instead of mowing 4 and not graze anything. And so it's just how you approach that. And we're not going to get too in depth on that side of things, but have contact info. And if you want to learn more and talk more, we can do that with an email or a call. But grazing has an opportunity to be competitive with these mowing contracts. It's something that, again, this is a paid service, and our competitor in this market is the mowing company. Um, our competitor is not the neighboring sheep producer that also wants to have a targeted grazing business and graze solar. There's not a need for us to cut legs out from one another when there's plenty of solar arrays to go around, plenty of targeted grazing opportunity to go around on ground that's conducive for raising sheep. So we think about some just conservative estimates on the industry growth side of things and why does it make sense? Why is there an opportunity for growth in these targeted grazing environments? Just a quick example on, we have 100 acres. We're going to stock it at 4 ewes per acre, and those 400 ewes are going to have 150% lamb crop. Each one of those ewes is going to drop 1.5 lambs for that lambing percentage. Gives us 600 lambs. We don't need to keep any. Again, there will be people that want to sit here and say, oh, that's perfect math. You're exactly right. And when we do math, it tends to be perfect. This is for the sake of an example, but we're producing 48,000 pounds of lamb on a live weight basis. We're going to sell those for $1.70 a pound or 170 a hundredweight. Generates $81,600. And on top of that, if we're able to generate $350 an acre on that vegetation management contract, all of a sudden those numbers work out very differently. 100 acres, why did I use that number? Easy math. Certainly we're seeing some sites that are much larger than this, and prices that are much larger than this on the dollars per acre. There are prices that are much lower than this. And so again, these are just estimates and some numbers. For example, why is this exciting and why is it an opportunity? Well, it's a shot of profitability that goes into the operation that allows for growth, something that maybe I don't have to work an off-farm job and continue to grow my flock. Maybe I can have a full-time career grazing sheep in this targeted environment. That's something for you as an individual to figure out and sort through. So ultimately, this doesn't just happen overnight. And we have an industry on the solar side of things that likes to move rapidly. I mean, that's energy in the US and it's expected. Agriculture and the sheep industry specifically doesn't move quite as fast. And so a lot of that is we're dealing with biology, we're dealing with livestock and animals, and then everyday life. And so what's essential in making sure that this is not only done and done quickly, but done correctly? And that's producer training and education. That's where American Land Board has really stepped up and jumped in to educating producers and really trying to get education out. Along with that, we have the American Sheep Industry and ASGA, or the American Solar Grazing Association. If we can capitalize on where all three of these entities, where their wheelhouse sits, and have collaboration, cooperation, I'm excited to say we do. The American Land Board workshops, targeted grazing workshops, specifically focused on solar education or solar grazing education, are ASGA certified events. And so I would challenge you, all three of these organizations have valuable resources. Tap into those, do your research, figure out if there is opportunity for growth. If there's not opportunity in this avenue, still, I think it's important we practice those climate smart practices, implement those climate smart practices, and improve that home operation as it sits today, and possibly generate growth. And I think it's possible on that home farm, on that home ranch. But overview for today, when we think about symbiosis and identifying areas, we talked about stackable items in our enterprise, mutualistic, finding opportunities that solar company may benefit from a PR standpoint of having sheep on that site. Well, then that shepherd, that grazer, is benefiting from having access to that acreage, having access to that contract payment. It's a mutualistic environment. And so how do we how do we create a culture of that, of a mutualistic relationship with an industry that is not agriculture and then a sheep industry? There's an opportunity for significant flock growth. And the whole point of highlighting kind of where we're at with the import side of things, where we're at on our trajectory for the sheep industry is negative, has been negative. There's a need for growth. I remember, in 4-H, I'd attend an extension event and would hear the same thing, that we need to add more sheep to our national inventory. And, if everybody were to add 2 sheep every year, what could the industry grow, or how could the industry grow? I think it provides a competitive advantage for our lamb if we can grow and we can put that product on the shelf, put that product on the table for the American consumer and say, hey, we have a good product, taste it, find out. Here's a recipe on how to cook it. So we make sure that when you do taste it, it's good. That's something that it's competition, and every protein faces that. Climate smart practices can be implemented with ease. It's something that you're not necessarily going out and putting a digester on your farm if you're raising sheep. You're not going out and implementing these crazy things. And in a lot of cases, we've got producers that are already implementing a lot of these practices, but aren't telling the story. And maybe the industry is really working on telling that story and providing you with data to say, hey, what I'm doing is correct, or what I'm doing is correct, but I could take it a step further and improve. When we look at consumer perception, part of that grant that the American Land Board has is looking at, what does a labeled climate smart lamb product do to that consumer mindset? What is perception and buying habit? How does that change when we can advertise that, when we can see that on the product that we're already wanting to consume? I think that's going to be some exciting data, and look forward to sharing that with the industry and in the future. Then the increased need for education. I think it's always going to be something in agriculture, specifically to the sheep industry. We're always going to be hungry for information and need to be using that professional development, educating ourselves to improve as producers, to not do the same thing we did 10 years ago and actually strive for a sustainable business model. And that's what we all are after. And I hope that's something that we can truly achieve and work towards as individuals and ultimately as an industry. So with that, I'm not going to take questions today, but happy to take a call, a text, that's a cell number, take an email and have a conversation if you have any questions or want to talk further about anything that was in this presentation. So appreciate the opportunity again to present. Thank you.